Imagine that tomorrow, China begins the invasion of Taiwan. Japan, Australia, and the United States come to Taiwan's defense. During the course of the conflict, China launches a tactical nuclear weapon and destroys the American Air Force Base at Guam, killing 3,000 Americans in an attempt to turn the tide of battle in their favor. The president wants to respond in kind by targeting a similar Chinese target with our own tactical nuclear weapon. There's only one problem with all this. We probably couldn't do such a mission if we tried.
What we saw after the Cold War, I think we became complacent. We became complacent as a country. Our leaders became complacent.
Since the end of the Cold War with Soviet Russia, the United States has dramatically reduced the number of nuclear weapons around the world. It signed multiple arms control agreements with the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation, and today has an arsenal that is roughly 85% smaller than the one it fielded at the height of the Cold War. These nuclear drawdowns weren't just in Europe or the United States either. For instance, the United States removed its nuclear forces from Korea in 1991 and retired the nuclear variant of the Tomahawk cruise missile used broadly in the Pacific in the Obama administration.
The idea seemed to be out there that we wouldn't have these adversaries in the future. We had Russia, we thought, under control with the breakup of the Soviet Union. We always thought China would be an economic threat.
Even since the early 2000s, Republicans and Democrats, there was this erroneous assumption that took hold that really believed that our biggest problem was going to be terrorism throughout the Middle East and that the United States did not have to think seriously about deterring major power conflict.
After all was said and done, the U.S. was left with about 1,700 nuclear weapons, all of which are relics of the Cold War. The newest warhead in the arsenal is over 35 years old, with many that are decades older. Most of the warheads and delivery systems were meant to be retired and replaced by the late 1980s. But with the Cold War over, we simply kept old warheads and delivery systems in place through various life extension programs. Like a 1975 Cadillac, bought by our grandfather, we've been keeping America's strategic deterrent on life support.
Part of this is a hangover from what I call endless wars, where instead of having that strong deterrence, we got involved with, a quarter century of endless conflict that caused a great toll, both in terms of blood and treasure, something like $7 trillion and 70-odd thousand injured and over 7,000 dead in the Middle East. And while we got some significant benefits from that sacrifice, we also lost a lot.
The good thing was, during the 20 years after the end of the Cold War, things in Europe and East Asia were relatively quiet. While North Korea became a nuclear power in 2006, China had since the 1960s maintained a small arsenal of roughly 200 nuclear weapons.
For decades, the Chinese had a minimalist deterrent force. The leadership there de-emphasized nuclear forces, in fact, de-emphasized the military to a large degree. But with the advent of Xi Jinping's reign, things have changed dramatically.
Now the Chinese are rapidly expanding its nuclear program, and they're not talking to the United States about it.
In 2021, news reports indicated that China was building hundreds of missile silos in its western desert. These silos could house ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear weapons to the American homeland. And soon after these reports came out, the commander of U.S. Strategic Command testified before Congress that China was in the midst of a breathtaking nuclear breakout.
I'm not sure that we have ever seen an expansion of strategic nuclear capability ever by any country. The only ones that come close to my mind would be both the Soviet Union and the United States in the late 1950s and early 1960s, when we were inventing the ballistic missile submarine. We were inventing the intercontinental ballistic missile.
Indeed, the Defense Department's 2023 China Military Power Report noted that China was the fastest growing nuclear power on the planet.
China, since 2020, has tripled its nuclear arsenal, going from about 200 to over 600 today. So in 5 years, it's tripled. It's also projected to go beyond 1,000 by 2030.
That same report noted that China is building not only hundreds of missiles in its western desert, but also long-range bombers, submarines, and ground-based missile systems that can strike targets from Japan to Guam to northern Australia with conventional or nuclear weapons. In addition, the report noted that it is very possible that China is exploring anti-ship nuclear capabilities and fractional orbital bombardment systems, that is, space-based platforms that can drop munitions, including nuclear ones, onto Earth from space. All of this is taking place while China is fielding the world's largest navy, the world's largest concentration of missiles, and highly effective fifth-generation fighter aircraft.
If you accept the Chinese point of view, which I don't, but the Chinese point of view, which is that for 2 centuries they've been dominated by the West, and it's now China's turn to reemerge.
They are building a military designed for power projection, a military designed to be able to do aggression.
At the same time, China's building nuclear-capable, long-range hypersonic missiles that could, in time, be able to deliver nuclear weapons to the American homeland with little to no notice. Officially, China has a no first use doctrine when it comes to nuclear employment, a statement meaning that China will not be the first nation to employ nuclear weapons in a war.
I once testified that I could drive a truck through that no first use policy. What would constitute first use is an open question. Does a high altitude electromagnetic burst attack count as first use? Does it count as first use if it's over what you claim as your own territory? The Soviet Union had a no first use policy back during the Cold War, and I don't think we took any great comfort in the fact that they had that.
The United States, through official and unofficial channels, has sought wide open talks with China on virtually any topic China wants, from arms control to strategic stability, crisis management, and risk reduction measures.
And the Chinese have steadfastly refused to have any significant discussions, even basic discussions, with the United States.
Because the United States removed all of its nuclear capabilities from Asia and the Western Pacific after the Cold War, China today almost certainly enjoys a nuclear advantage over the United States within the Pacific theater. That advantage is going to grow. So what are they going to do with that advantage? China's military buildup seems to be part of a strategy aimed at matching the United States militarily over the coming years, forcing unification with Taiwan, and ultimately supplanting the United States as the world's preeminent power.
The Chinese have made very clear in their publications and statements that they want to push the United States out of the Asia Pacific, becoming the dominant power in that vital region, and by 2049 to achieve global status as an unrivaled power, at least equal to the United States.
The threat gets even more complicated because it's not only about the number of nuclear weapons out there, it's also about the kind of nuclear weapons out there. There are 2 big categories of nuclear weapons. The first is the strategic nuclear weapon. This is the kind we're all familiar with. They're designed to strike faraway targets and cause huge devastation. These are the city-busting or world-ending weapons portrayed in Hollywood doomsday films. The second is the tactical or non-strategic nuclear weapon. They have less explosive power and are designed to be used on smaller targets. This means that you could drop a nuclear weapon on a single ship at sea or on a single military base without causing widespread damage. The U.S. arsenal is not only old, we are also light on the modern, smaller tactical nuclear weapons that China is producing. And in a combat situation, that gives us fewer options. Let's say that China detonated a tactical nuclear weapon on an American base in Guam or on an aircraft carrier in the Pacific. Are we going to respond with what we have? A city-destroying nuclear weapon?
We now face opponents, great powers that have a different political outlook than we do, who are capable of escalating to any level of violence they choose, to include strategic nuclear, in any domain, worldwide, with any instrument of national power, at a time and a place of their choosing.
Russia is modernizing aggressively its nuclear capabilities. North Korea is doing the same. And Iran, of course, is a wild card. It's a nuclear threshold state, which could be very much part of this broader axis of authoritarianism that has a nuclear capability.
So what do we do? Some suggest that we need to pursue arms control agreements like we did with the Soviets in the Cold War, but it doesn't seem like that's going to work this time.
The reason the Soviets came to the table and made concessions is because we had programs they wanted to control and contain. But right now, we're preaching about arms control, but building nothing. There's no reason for them to engage.
Fortunately, the first Trump administration did try diplomacy with the Chinese and the Russians when it came to their nuclear forces. But unfortunately, the Chinese have been unwilling to be transparent, which is, of course, a necessary condition for successful arms control. My argument has long been that it's going to take the United States building up its forces in the region around China so that China understands that it's in its interest to start talking to the United States.
We'd like to see denuclearization. Tremendous amounts of money are being spent on nuclear, and the destructive capability is something that we don't even want to talk about today. You don't want to hear it. It's too depressing.
We, too, at the Heritage Foundation, look forward to a world without nuclear weapons. But until that day comes, the United States has to field a nuclear arsenal that can credibly deter its adversaries. First, we must modernize the existing strategic arsenal and replace the decades-old warheads and missiles that were meant to be retired in the 1980s and 1990s. That means re-energizing America's industrial base.
I think we need a resurgence of strength in the Western Hemisphere. I think we need to push China out. I think we need a much stronger but modern Navy that's not built on what K Street contracts are saying they need to be, but are rather what do we actually need. I think the most important thing we can do to achieve national security is get debt and deficit spending down while we focus a military build-out that is appropriate for the 21st century in truth to defend against our adversaries.
Second, we must diversify the existing arsenal to field new capabilities that are able to deter America's nuclear-armed adversaries, to convince them that any attempts at nuclear coercion or blackmail, to include with low-yield nuclear weapons, will fail.
This goes back to peace through strength. We build an arsenal, we build these new platforms, hoping we never use them.
And we must defend the American homeland from any kind of strategic attack. This will mean building capable missile defenses, such as the Iron Dome for America, and focusing on fielding a military force that focuses, as Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has said, on lethality.
I think the world is really watching both allies and adversaries. Is the United States going to accept decline and live in a world in which the Chinese, the Russians, perhaps the Iran regime and the North Koreans can successfully coerce the United States of America to prevent us from moving in the world on terms that benefit the American people and our prosperity and freedom? Or is the United States going to get serious about investing in its strongest, most powerful weapons in order to make sure that the United States remains the strongest power in the world and the country that, better than any other country, can affect events such that the American people are more secure, more prosperous, and free?
National security is the main responsibility of a federal government. I don't want people to have to worry every single day if this country is safe.
To deter the war from breaking out, the United States must field the military capabilities that will convince the Chinese leadership that today is not the day to pick a fight with the United States or its allies.